All right, welcome back, friends, citizens of the Do Our Things Nation, to another episode of the Do Our Things podcast. I'm your host, Jay Teagues, leadership trainer, speaker, adventure coach, founder of the Do Our Things Nation, and I'd like to welcome you to yet another episode. And this podcast is about learning, growth, and leveling up so you can be the best version of yourself and achieve your highest potential. In today's episode, honored to have Michael Terry with us from Dispatch Adventure Rides. Am I saying that right? Dispatch Adventure Rides?
Dispatches, yeah, you hit the post.
Yeah, no. So we connected in a similar just a veterans group, and I had a lot of interest because Mike is really into long distance motorcycle riding, and when I learned about what he was doing, openly talking about PTSD and his service, I'm like, oh, I got to connect with Mike, and so I'm honored to have you on because there's a lot of commonality. I have a lot of general interest in you. So thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Jay.
So before we get into today's conversation, make sure you smash that subscribe button so you're notified of future episodes. We're on all your podcast platforms. We're on YouTube. But no matter what platform you're on, iTunes is like the gold standard for reviews. So I ask that if you gained any value, please go over to iTunes, leave us a review. It goes a long way with expanding our reach. And it means a lot to leave us a fair review. And I read every one of them. They mean a lot. And let us know what you think about the show. Share it with two of your friends. There's probably a nugget or something that's going to come out of this conversation today that could really serve somebody. That's the intent of this podcast. So take a screenshot, share it with your friends, and give us some feedback. Reach out to me directly. Reach out to Mike Terry. Let him know what you thought. And you can, just hit us up on social. All the notes and links and contact information will be in the show notes. This episode is sponsored by Lions Guide. Lions Guide is a growth agency, and we feel that everyone's a leader. And, leaders can always continue to grow, and being the one in charge can be incredibly overwhelming at times. Without the right support, you feel like you're hardly keeping up with demands, you struggle to maintain your staff and your team, you find yourself overwhelmed and maybe lacking confidence. It doesn't have to be that way. Lions Guide helps leaders like you gain the confidence, accomplish more, and earn the personal freedom you sought to achieve. And we can help you with the online academy, group coaching, one-on-one coaching, and organizational workshops. So let Lions Guide help you solve your leadership challenges. Go to www.lionsguide.com. This episode is also brought to you by UARD, the University of Applied Research and Development, who are helping veterans obtain their bachelor and master's degree in emergency management. You can study abroad in New Zealand for a short tour or a long tour up to 3 months, fully funded by the VA, using your GI Bill, voc rehab. This is specifically for U.S. veterans. Get maximum credit for your military service. It's non-traditional, and it's a great way to experience the amazing cultural beauty of New Zealand. You can reach out to me directly. You can go to www.doourthingsnation.com, click on Do Our Things down under, or you can go to the university website, www.uard.university. And finally, we've got a bunch of merch. We've got the Do Hard Things apparel line. We got hats and hoodies and high quality gear if you're out there crushing it. So go show the world that you do hard things. Go to dohardthingsnation.com. Go grab yourself some apparel. And that's it. That's the business end. So let me introduce to you Michael Terry. Michael Terry is a 23-year veteran of the Canadian Armed Forces. He retired in 2018 due to complications arising from post-traumatic stress disorder and immediately began to feel the effects of depression, loneliness, isolation, as well as loss of identity and purpose. To combat these side effects, Michael began to ride his motorcycle around Canada and to speak openly about his struggles living with PTSD and his challenges transitioning to civilian life. Not only has this forced him to face his own issues head on, it's also allowed him to continue to serve his community, to challenge himself mentally and physically, and to find new passion and purpose, and to begin the healing process. And so thanks for coming on. I'm really excited to have you here. And I guess just, what did I miss? Tell us a little bit about what you do, who you are.
Well, thanks for having me on, Jay. So as my bio said, I did 23 years in the Canadian Armed Forces, joined right out of high school, like so many of us do. Kind of the only job I had in my adult life, really. I was actually deployed 3 times to Bosnia in 99, Ethiopia, Eritrea in 2000, 2001, and Afghanistan in 2008. And I was actually diagnosed with PTSD after I returned from Africa in 2001. So I served another 17 years post-injury. And really just, at the end of my career, I just started to notice I just couldn't do it anymore. I was minimizing. I was kind of denying my injury, just always proving that I'm okay. And it just caught up with me over time. So yeah, that kind of, that led to my release, and really just, kind of being in a bad spot and deciding, you know what, I've got to do something positive. So I did what any normal sane person would do. I bought a motorcycle and, toured this huge country and talked about my feelings, as comes naturally to us old grunts, right? We love talking about that stuff. So, that's the Cole's notes. That's kind of, that's how I got started in veteran and mental health advocacy.
I'm going to assume, your military being very similar to our military in a lot of different ways, probably in that time period, if you were to talk about PTSD and trauma and mental health, I know during that time frame, it's kind of looked down upon. That could be potentially a career ender. Did you find yourself in the same type of situation?
Yeah, absolutely. I was a young corporal, just newly promoted when I was diagnosed in 2001. I had a young family, just bought a house. Being a soldier is all I ever wanted to do. It's all I had done. And I was pretty much convinced that my career was over right then and there. Back in 2001, if you were diagnosed with PTSD, it was pretty much a one-way ticket out of the forces. You could look around and ask yourself, how many guys here do I know who are diagnosed with PTSD? And the answer is none, because they're not here. So yeah, no, I definitely, I kind of tread the line of being very open and honest about it, and overcompensated by being an overachiever and a workaholic. So it kind of let me hide in plain sight, I guess, is the way to kind of describe it. Everybody knew I was diagnosed with PTSD, but everybody said, well, he's always here, he's always performing, so I guess everything's okay. And
yeah, he's functioning, he's working hard, right? He's grinding it out. He's someone you can count on, so it must be all right.
Yep, exactly. And of course, that's a lie I told myself as well. You point to all the hard, all the work you do, like, oh, look at all the stuff I'm accomplishing. Obviously, I'm okay. So it's, but I mean, I led a double life. At work, I was one guy. I was always there. I was, always laughing. I was the life of the party. And at home, I was just a completely different person. Just completely withdrawn, isolated, angry, or numbed out completely.
Hmm. So is that suffering in silence syndrome? Essentially, it's I've been there myself, and it's like you're playing two different characters.
Yeah, absolutely. And anytime you're outside of the house, it's like you're on all the time. So then when you do get back home, like that entire facade crumbles like really quickly, and of course the family bears the brunt of that. So yeah. And then obviously, all my personal relationships, the very few people who were close to me that I allowed to remain close to me, those relationships underwent a tremendous amount of stress, and, I'm still working to repair some of those relationships. So,
yeah. What kind of toll did that take on you? The kind of stuffing it away and just, not dealing with it effectively, or?
Well, almost a constant state of depression. I was really angry through most of my career, always just on the edge of anger. And I mean, and in contrast, when I released, I started to experience a lot of anxiety and panic attacks. And, really, because anger it's a deflection, it's an emotion you project outward. So, I was really shaken when I first released, because I'm like, why am I having so much anxiety? I've never been a fearful person. There's never been an issue before. But it's because I was actually working on things and getting below the anger to, because the root cause of that anger was always anxiety. I'm going to be found out, or my job's going to end, all those things. So yeah, I was just angry all the time. And of course, being angry all the time takes that physical and mental toll on you. So I was always exhausted physically, emotionally, cognitively, and the other thing I think that kind of eats away at you is you're not necessarily lying to people, but you're being disingenuous. Come on. Oh, sorry. Just 1 second.
That's all good.
I'm on a call, honey. My wife just came home. Yeah. You're kind of living this double life. Like you're this one person at work. And so, that feeds into that imposter syndrome, or just this low level feeling like you're being dishonest. So, of course, that has an emotional impact as well in how you relate to people and how you view yourself.
Yeah, the feeling of being dishonest, right? Because you're playing, you're trying to not, you don't want to show people your hand. You don't want to show you're playing that character, right? So you're projecting this image, but deep down inside, like it wears on you, it wears on your subconscious. It makes you feel maybe a little guilty. I think that amplifies the depression tendencies, right? You don't want people to find out who you really are.
Yeah, I found I think that was a big problem I have with self-worth came from that as well. I'm sure there are other causes to it. I think, all of it's a big stew, right? But yeah, it definitely, just living this double life, it just wears you out completely. And it really gets in the way of you showing the true, your true self to people, even the people close to you, because they're getting a version of you that's just completely wrung out, by the time they, you're in that position where you're with them. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I don't know if you want to share this or not, but is there like a specific incident that happened? I mean, I'm assuming there was something that happened that really amplified the PTSD. If you don't want to go into it, we don't have to talk about it. But...
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, so there was an incident in Africa that actually got me diagnosed, and it was a close encounter with a black mamba. Mm-hmm. And, when it happened, it was two Eritrean soldiers who actually, came running at me, shouting into Grignon, which I don't speak. So I couldn't understand, what they were saying, but they're motioning me away from where I was sitting next to my coyote, which I think you guys call a lav too. Mm-hmm. And when I got up, the snake slithered away. And what I found out later was, it was a black mamba. We were an hour from camp. Our position was an hour from camp. Our camp was about 2 hours flight from the main body. And there's no anti-venom anywhere in the country. So if that snake had bitten me, I would have, I would have had about 7 to 15 hours of living in, extreme discomfort. And then I would have died. So that had happened. And it wasn't until about 5 months later at a dinner party that a guy asked me, hey, anything, any crazy stories from Africa? And I said, no, it was quiet, not much happened. And then I remembered this story and shared it with him. And I had a response, 5 months after the fact. I'd actually forgotten about it. So my wife was livid because she said, you could have died. You didn't tell me. Why'd you keep that from me? And I said, no, I honestly forgot. We might have talked about it in camp that morning. And then we just went on doing what we do. That's, stuff happens. You just carry on. So we were actually seeing a marriage counselor. And I mentioned that to the marriage counselor about forgetting about this snake. And that's how I got referred for assessment. And we found out, yeah, you have an operational stress injury with PTSD, major depressive disorder, and adjustment disorder. So, that was 24 years old, very early into that career. And yeah, that's what got me diagnosed. What saw me out the door 17 years later was a posting. By this time I was an imagery technician, I was a photographer, and they were posting me to Shiloh, Manitoba, to an army base there. It's, it's a small place and not a lot of people want to go there. I don't know. They send you guys to Alaska when you're bad, right?
Yeah, we got a few places worse than that.
They send us
Fort
to Shiloh,
Polk, Louisiana, New York. Up in Fort Drum. Those are usually worse.
So, and I jest. I mean, I was actually just in Shiloh last week, but yeah. So I got this posting, and it was a dream job. I was going to be a photographer on an army base, army guys doing army stuff. Pretty much going to be my own boss, and I had this severe reaction. I didn't, to being posted. I didn't want to be posted. And that was the cue to me that said, I can't tolerate living this life anymore. So yeah, those were the kind of the two experiences that bookended, my diagnosis and the end of that career, because my chain of command and my trade were adamant that I was going to be posted. So it turned into, my last year of service got real messy because of that. We were just at odds over me needing care and kind of being told, no, you're going here. So there's a bit of that moral injury that comes into it, and I see it over, I saw it in myself. I've seen it over and over. You go from being a rock star, a high performer, and then, one day it's just full stop. I can't do this anymore. Which is, looking back and speaking to other people, I realize that is the recipe of somebody who's been minimizing for years and overcompensating for years. One day it's just boom, I can't do this anymore. And then the chain of command sees you being, oh, you're a rock star. Oh, you got this posting. You don't want to go there. And now suddenly you're shutting down. And they see it as posting avoidance, and it becomes it became an issue. So that, there's the way we handle releases. And I don't know if it's the same for you guys. The forces is not the best at that here. It's very hard to, for members who are injured, it can be very hard, that release process, because you go from hero to zero real quick sometimes, which was definitely what I experienced. And because all my personal relationships were so bad, I was married to the job. And then when it feels like the institution turns on you, there's that moral injury that comes with that as well. So those were kind of the two experiences that bookended, my career in terms of having PTSD.
Yeah. So like when you got out, like your whole, like all of your friends, your whole identity, everything, like you're leaving it all behind, right? Which can exasperate a lot of things. And I really like what you highlighted. We tend to minimize things and overcompensate for things. I look back in my career, my life in general, I've definitely found myself doing things like that, downplaying certain things that happened to me, like it wasn't a big deal, and then overcompensating by trying to be a high performer or to put on that show, right? That
Yep.
as a way to just kind of shield yourself and keep yourself in this like cocoon of safety, if you will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the other part too is there was this constant need to prove that I belonged, right? Because I was worried about, I'm affected by PTSD. I'm going to lose my job. So I have to constantly prove that I belong here. So you're always just trying to go harder. And, and yeah, and I mean, eventually, that is a recipe for burnout. Absolutely. And again, like I said, the Canadian Forces, the Canadian Armed Forces, and the people I served with, they became my family because I didn't have any other family. I was pretty much alienated and not able to connect at home the way I needed to be able to. So, I wasn't maintaining healthy relationships outside of work. That was my world. So when it felt like that kind of turned on me, that was absolutely devastating. In addition to losing purpose, losing identity, losing the mental and physical challenges that had really kind of sustained me that whole time. That's, constantly proving yourself against, that environment really kind of helped keep a lot of the PTSD at bay, or it kept me from feeling a lot of the effects of it. So in 2012, I went from the infantry to being a photographer. And that's when life's, that's when it started to catch up with me. When life got easier, that's when I started to really struggle with it, because there wasn't all this distraction kind of built into my day-to-day life. So
when life got easier, that's when you really started to notice them.
Yeah, absolutely. And then that next step, of course, was retiring and becoming a civilian, and life, takes that next step down in intensity. And then again, finding how to keep myself occupied. I don't have this thing that, I identify as anymore. So, and really having to reinvent myself.
Yeah. Well, I find it fascinating that trauma just comes in all sorts of shapes and sizes. And it's a fascinating thing how your mind blocks it out. Like anything traumatic that's happened to you, it's very difficult to remember what happened, right? Because it's a way for your mind to like safeguard you from the harm and reliving that. So it's interesting that you said that you had a hard time recounting that, and like, oh, that was a trigger point for me. Like that was something that, because we minimized it, right, as not being a big deal, but it did have some effect on you. Yeah.
Yeah. Nothing happened. I didn't get bit. Yeah. But it was that part where my mind blanked on it. And I've had that experience with other, much more severe events as well. One of the other things I noticed, and it came up in my ride this year, is there's a lot of past events that I do remember and I've spoken about, and I feel like, oh, that doesn't, that never affected me. And then now that, my perspective has very much changed from, minimization and denial to facing it head on and healing through it. And of course, with that opening, that different perspective, you open yourself up and things impact you in different ways. And, I was riding through northern BC and I came upon a horse that had been hit by a car. And I mean, it was sad. It was kind of left alone and, nobody really cared. But it actually brought up it tied into this event from Ethiopia in 2001, where I saw a fellow soldier, an Ethiopian soldier rather, die. And nobody really cared. Like his own people just the body wasn't even done twitching and they were stripping his boots and his watch off. And there was this indifference to that. And I remember commenting on it for years. I told the story and thought, yeah, it just kind of sucks, but no big deal. But it's funny being faced with this animal that was mortally injured and going door to door to find somebody to help me identify the owner and maybe, find some help and kind of meeting with that indifference towards life and that feeling of helplessness. It really brought that event back. And I realized, I think like 20 years later, I'm having an emotional reaction to that event that I did not have an emotional reaction to ever before. So, we become accustomed to the exceptional. We experience things that are way outside of the norm on a day-to-day basis, and it normalizes it, and we don't realize, I know I've told stories to civilian acquaintances, and I'll tell them something that happened, and they'll say, "Oh man, that's crazy," and I'll be like, "Well, it was a Tuesday, that could be any day of the week. That's just life. That's normal." Most people deal with one, maybe two really significant trauma events in their life, maybe. And, for us, for first responders, we go from one to the next, to the next, to the next. And it becomes so normalized. It doesn't even show up on the radar. It really wasn't until, I dropped the armor, let my guard down, that I had an emotional reaction to some of these things. And I'm still finding things kind of percolating to the surface, and probably, it's 20 years of minimization and denial. I'm probably going to find that for a while.
When did the switch come on? Like, I'm ready to talk about these things. I'm ready to really deal with this head on. When was that?
Well, that was right after I retired in April 2018. I was in bad shape. That last year of service, like I said, was very contentious with the forces, with my chain of command and my trade. And that really took a toll. And yeah, it was actually a friend of mine named Sheldon Roberts. And Sheldon was a sniper in 2nd Battalion, the Royal Canadian Regiment, where, I was in the same regiment, same battalion. He and I deployed on two of the same missions together. He's somebody I looked to as a mentor, somebody I respected. And we'd lost a mutual friend and his brother to suicide, the mutual friend to heart failure, both veterans. And he was on television giving an interview, and he was talking about the struggles that he has with PTSD and in relation to, losing those friends and what they might have been experiencing. And as I sat there listening to Sheldon, his and my experiences, were different, but the struggles he was talking about, I have, almost all the same struggles. And as I sat there listening to him, I realized, what, I don't see him any differently. I haven't lost any respect for him. I don't judge him harshly. If anything, I respect him more for having the courage to speak out about that. And I realized that I judge myself harshly. I still beat myself up for having those same struggles. And that's where I said, what, like that doesn't make sense. So I'm going to go out and talk about it and take ownership of it. I'm going to face it. And by sharing that, maybe somebody else will hear me and say, well, if that guy can talk about it, then I can talk about it too. So that was that turning point. And honestly, it was right almost immediately after release because, come April 2018, I was on the verge of suicide when I left the forces. And completely alienated from family, didn't live near anybody that I deployed with, and, moved to a small town to go to school where I knew absolutely nobody. And that was where I kind of looked around and said, this is bad. I've got 5 months before school starts. And, I was going on to take college courses. And if I sit here by myself for 5 months, I'm not going to school. So that was the inspiration to ride the bike, and Sheldon provided the inspiration to go out and talk about it.
Did you find it? I'm assuming it's probably similar in Canada, where it's just difficult for a service member to just connect with civilians, right? There's just such a divide on, just our community in the military, our experiences. It's very difficult to just connect and share and just have that shared understanding. I'm assuming it's the same up there.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I released with some serious trust issues, but also, that feeling that I'm never going to be able to connect with people who don't have shared experience or similar experience to my own. And I even found that within the forces, people who didn't come from that infantry background, who didn't have some of that same experience, I had a hard time connecting with them. So for civilians, even much more to the point. And 2 months into going to school, college level curriculum, which isn't difficult, I was ready to quit. I was exhausted. I felt alone. I felt, kind of completely isolated. I was filtering everything I thought and said. So, I was exhausted all the time. But when I started to open up to the people around me and speak about things at an emotional level and the human level, instead of focusing on the experiences, what I found was that was the doorway to connecting with people from all backgrounds. Because everybody in this world has experienced loss. Everybody in this world has experienced grief. Maybe not always to the degree that all of us have, or the frequency, but everybody can understand those struggles. Everybody can understand, or a lot of people can understand what it feels like to be depressed. And when I opened up and started to be a little more vulnerable and a bit more forthcoming, people started to come to me. And it was funny, because I was an infantry instructor at one time, and we can have a bit of a vibe about us, right? A little bit, we eyed a little bit about an 8. So, I felt like as a civilian, I'd been an imagery technician, a photographer for a while, and I kind of brought it down a notch, and I felt, okay, I'm pretty calm. And then I released from the forces, and I felt like, okay, I'm pretty calm. But when I opened up and started connecting with the people around me, and they were comfortable enough to come forward and say, look, man, we didn't know what to do with you. You're this Army guy sitting in the corner, just vibrating with this intensity that we don't, like it was intimidating. And I felt like I was pretty chill. But there's still that tone. So yeah, a lot of them, I felt alone because they were afraid to take that first step. And once I started to open up and just be very honest about a lot of these things, and talk about things on that emotional human level, the world kind of opened up to me. It's still difficult. I still need that connection with veteran and first responder friends who understand, who get it. But, I've also been able to build relationships with people who didn't come from those communities. It's just, you got to take that leap of faith, and it's hard to do. And especially, like I said, coming out of things the way I did, I had 6 years of being a photographer and feeling like I was misunderstood and alienated, even though I was still in the uniform. So, it was a big leap to think that people who never even had that experience I was going to be able to connect with them. But yeah, by and by, I kind of found the way.
Yeah, I brought this analogy up a few times, but we in the military, we've learned how to play rugby full contact, and when you depart the service, everyone's playing soccer. So a lot of things look the same. The uniform looks similar. The pitch looks similar. But we're out there tackling people, scoring touchdowns. They're like, red card, yellow card. What are you doing? I'm like, I'm trying to win the game. And like, you're playing it all wrong. And we can go and be like, you know what? Well, I'm just a rugby player and you don't get me, and stay with our rugby friends. But I think the transition process, the more effective way is to figure out, start using the skills that made you really good at rugby and learn how to play soccer again and reintegrate with everyone else that's out there playing soccer.
Yeah. And that was definitely my experience as a photographer. I went from being an infantry instructor to a photographer, candidate, a student. And it was an Air Force tech trade at the time. So it was completely blue, and my head exploded on a daily basis. And
so you went from the Army to the Air Force.
Yep. Okay. Now the trade, the imagery technician trade, a couple years later or a year later went purple, we call it. So all elements. So I scooted back to the Army just as quick as I could, because blue wasn't my color. But really, that failure to connect and being at odds with the people around me, in that image tech trade, I was basically sitting there going, yeah, you guys aren't doing it right. I'm going to show you how to do it, and I'm going to bring you all up here with me. Kind of, that was that thought that I had in my mind, right? A little bit of hubris there. So, instead of me adapting to my environment, I was trying to change my environment to adapt to me, to be what was comfortable and normal for me. And I think having that failed because I counted as a failed transition. I did fairly well as an image tech, but It was my exit, and it was a failed transition. So having that under my belt, I think really was a huge plus when it came time to retire, because I already had some lessons learned. I already took some knocks from this and said, okay, that didn't work last time. I need a new approach. But, so many of us, I think we leave the forces, and, I couldn't tolerate being in that environment anymore. Like, it wasn't healthy for me, but I didn't really want to leave. I just had to. And we get out and we feel like, oh, nobody's going to understand me. But we kind of want everything to be the way it was. We don't want to change to come into that environment. We want to stay the way we are and expect people to come to us. And it's just, it's just not a realistic expectation. So, clinging to those values and clinging to those expectations, I was projecting those expectations onto the people around me. And then I was disappointed and frustrated. And, I said, oh, well, they're the problem. No, it's obviously not me. But, it took a lot to get over myself and say, you know what? I can still keep my values and my expectations for myself and not force those expectations onto everybody around me. And I can, and I can connect with people. That was a big thing. When I stopped expecting those people to behave like me, to think like me, that's when those connections started to happen.
I've definitely felt that. That's why I stayed in the Army for as long as I did, 27 years, because I got to a point where I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. I don't know how I'm going to integrate. I did some volunteer work with civilians. It didn't turn out very well. I was kind of hot-headed and angry, and it just like, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this? That gave me, like, kind of like you, that gave me like my first inkling of that transition, because I'm like, I have to change my approach. Like, my leadership approach and style in the military isn't going to work out so well here in the civilian sector. But then I also found the organization was changing so much. Like, I'm kind of over this stuff too. And I kind of found myself like apprehensive about the transition. But then I realized I need to start working on myself. Like, to make that transition, I got to work on which that led to this podcast and the performance coaching that I'm doing now. And I tell people, like, all of this is part of my healing process and part of me learning and making that bridge and trying to help, because I know that I'm not alone in that, and realizing that there's other people that are struggling with this too. And so I can empathize with all of that, which is, lends me to, I guess, transitioning now to your healing, which is the adventures, right? The dispatches. And so can you tell us a little bit about that, how that got started, and what do you do with it?
Well, I mean, I was a dispatch rider in the forces way back in like 2002.
Yeah. What is that? What is that? It's just,
so a dispatch rider, you were a motorcycle messenger. So basically the summer you had the motorcycle, the winter you had a Jeep, and you ran hard copies of orders and map traces between units and locations. Of course, come 2002, we started to have encrypted communications. Afghanistan is asymmetrical warfare, so bombing around there on a motorcycle, in twos is not a great idea. So they canceled the rider program in, I want to say, 2003. So I wasn't a dispatch rider very long. I never did it operationally, but that was how I got started with motorcycling. And
did you know how to ride before then, or
No, I did a bit of mountain biking, but that was it. Which translated fairly well, except I kept getting the back brake and the front brake mixed up. So that kind of sucked for a while. I learned how to drop a bike, though, let me tell you. So that's how I got started with motorcycling. And, I was, I'm an Army geek through and through. Once I got my leadership training, and learned, formally learned battle procedure and planning process, I picked that up, real quick, and started using that to plan my own excursions, canoe trips, hiking trips, things like that. So I really honed that tool. So when I released, I thought, you know what, I've got the opportunity. I'm going to buy a bike. So I bought a KLR 650, which is the big brother of the bike I learned on. And I put that planning process to work and planning, 2.5 months, a 75-day tour all across Canada, to go out and share and ride and see the country. I'd never seen it all, Canada's huge. So that was kind of how I started. The adventuring has always been a side of it, especially when I became a photographer. I started to plan a lot of my own, once I became a photographer, I started to plan a lot of my own kind of hiking and canoeing adventures, like long distance, because I missed that challenge. So so I kind of had developed that tool before I released. But I love going through the planning process. I love solving kind of the logistical and tactical problems, and building myself a schedule and then keeping myself to it, so, come up with an idea, make it a reality, and then, will it into being. So yeah, that was kind of that natural way to turn, in terms of, of finding that purpose and passion. It's been a way for me to take that military experience I have and apply it in the civilian world, because I'm constantly, looking at that planning procedure and kind of all those different leadership lessons and saying, okay, how does this apply to me now? How can I employ this? How can I leverage it? Which is also a huge part of transition, because especially being a grunt, what do you do when you get out? If I'm going to go apply for a job at McDonald's and they say, what are you good at? Well, I can lay an 81 millimeter mortar and I'm real good with a light machine gun. That doesn't really help me. So I am good at mopping floors too. So maybe that would get me in the door. But, so really, I think a lot of us struggle with, what value do I have in the civilian world? And there's a lot of those, quote unquote, soft skills that we have that with a little bit of tweaking, we can find where they fit. And once your civilian counterparts kind of catch on to your ability to do some of these things, you become a resource. It's appreciated. It is highly sought after. But it's just about, just examining kind of all your skills, your values, your perceptions, and saying, okay, is there anything here I'm clinging to needlessly that I can let go of? Is there anything I can repurpose? Is there anything that just needs this little tweak to kind of fit in with my new reality? And it's an exhausting process, but it's just having that curiosity and looking at it like that. And I've kind of lost the thread here. Did I answer your question, Jay?
No, you're good. That goes back to, getting really good at rugby, and how can you take what made you really good there? Obviously you can't tackle people in soccer. Hell, I think if you just kick the ball, they fall down and pretend that they're hurt. You gotta be very careful, right? But there's that speed and agility and all those other things, all the things that, you're right. It's the softer skills. It's like the counseling sessions, right, that we do with our soldiers and subordinates and non-commissioned officers. Well, those are performance appraisals, and there's a variety of different things that you do there, that level of attention to detail, to showing up on time, to getting things accomplished. All of those things are highly sought after. To the businesses that have figured it out and appreciate it, because there's some businesses that still don't understand. But I know that there's some businesses out there that recruit specifically for that, because they understand the value that veterans bring.
Yeah. And it's funny. I started teaching college last fall. So I actually taught in the program that I graduated from. I teach advocacy and leadership at Fanshawe College. And I always loved teaching, so I came right to it very naturally. But this is my first experience kind of teaching the civilian world for a formal organization. I've taught workshops and things before. But, I realized, a few other things too. I was hired on as a professor. And in my mind, that immediately means I'm a leader, I'm a counselor, I'm a teacher, because that was all part and parcel with what we did. Like you said, we counseled our soldiers, between performance appraisals or counseling them through personal shit, because we're in the field. There's, you're not taking a time out to go talk to somebody else. You as a section commander or 2IC, you're a counselor, you're a leader, you're an educator, you're a coach. And what I realized in the civilian world is a lot of those are broken up. So I was expected to teach and kind of do nothing else. So it was a bit of an eye opener for me there as well. So, that's the thing. Again, my view of a leader and an educator was, it's all of this, and coming up against, a little bit of friction and realizing, okay, I've got to kind of break these apart, because now I'm part of a machine again, but it's a different machine. It's not the same. But it also was a good eye opener for me to say, you know what? I walked into this and I'm still carrying perceptions. I still run into those things. And really, it's going out into the world and bumping into things that teaches me, where I need to work. Like, well, typical dumb grunt, I don't know the stove's hot until, until I put my hand on it, or I don't know not to touch the barrel I just took off the light machine gun until I burn my hand at least once, maybe a dozen times. So going out there and kind of running into these challenges has been a huge way for me to have these moments where I go, oh, okay, I see what I'm doing here. I see what's happening. I'm still holding on to this perception. I need to look at this just a little different. So yeah, that's the other part of transition that's difficult, is you got to be willing to go out there and bark your shins on stuff to learn.
Yeah, absolutely. That's how I learned a lot of my lessons the hard way. As far as your speaker tour, when did that start? How did you get started with that?
Well, it started with that first ride in 2018. Now that first ride, I went from, day one, not owning a motorcycle, to 6 weeks later, I've got a bike. I've decked it out for adventure touring. I've built a schedule, and I just kind of knit this thing as I went. I'm just going to go out there and talk to people. So it's very unstructured. And over time, in iteration after iteration, you refine your process. And finally in 2021, I said, I need to really focus. I started to say, what's my deliverable? What's the concrete? And I said, well, it's speaking. So maybe I need to start booking just formal speaking engagements, and presenting it that way. And that's really how it kind of evolved. It went from me just off the cuff talking to whoever would listen or wanted to have a discussion about PTSD or transition, to me saying, okay, contacting organizations saying, look, this is what I offer. I'll come in and speak. I don't charge anything. This is what I talk about. Do you want to host? And yeah, that's kind of how it evolved. So now I'm 5 years in, and last week, Canadian Forces Base Shiloh actually flew me out for their wellness symposium. So that was the first time I've had, I'm finally at the point where organizations are starting to draw me to them to speak, instead of kind of having to push and wedge my way in. So yeah, that's just been that evolution of it. It started right in 2018 and just evolved from there.
That's awesome. How is your healing been to be able to, I guess, by going through this process? Windshield therapy on a motorcycle is the best therapy that's out there. But in addition to just kind of speaking, like, how has all of that helped you overcome and manage the PTSD and all the emotions you feel with it?
Well, it helps in a lot of ways. So every time I have to speak my story, I have to own it. So that's step one, is I've got to face it. I've got to own it in order to speak it. As I share it, different parts of my story on different days will be very activating for me, emotionally, or you can use the word triggered if you like. And that really gives me a roadmap for where I need to focus my efforts next. Because anything that's still activating is like, okay, this is still, if I speak publicly about this and I start to well up, it's like, okay, there's still something there I need to explore. So it gives me direction with that. As I go out and talk to other people, I get to hear their point of view. I get to hear their feedback on my story, or they share some of theirs. And it gives me other perspectives to look at my own issues from. So there's a lot of reflection. The fact that I am going out to speak, and then the next day I'll be on the bike for 8 or 10 hours traveling to my next location, maybe 3 or 4 days in a row, means I've got that time in the helmet to reflect on those experiences. So it's got a very nice natural cycle to it, as far as, exposure, reflection, exposure, reflection. The other thing, though, that I was very concerned about was, I suffer from some serious white knight syndrome, in the past, in my relationships, in my professional life, where I was taking on everybody else's issues, because if I take on their issues, I can't focus on my own. I don't have time. And I do see that a bit in veteran advocacy, where people are out doing these things and it's just putting off their own needs. And I know I'm susceptible to that. So I'm at high risk for that. So I really kind of framed it, I'm not out trying to save people. I'm out here trying to save myself. And I'm inviting other people in to kind of share in that process or witness that process, in the hopes that it inspires them to save themselves. And that's how I kind of work to avoid, getting burnt out or getting into that white knight syndrome, where I'm focusing everything outward and I'm not looking after myself. I do still struggle with burnout. I do still, I task saturate. I take on too much, because if I keep busy, it keeps the demons at bay. So I'm still fine tuning how much, I have to be engaged with other things and how much I have to suck back and kind of sit with myself. So that's still a learning curve, right?
Yeah, being comfortable sitting with yourself. That's a challenge, because I can empathize with all of that. That keeping yourself busy keeps the demons at bay. You gotta love yourself and be able to sit idly with yourself, and that's hard to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we're used to, we're used to just go, go, go. It's always something, right? So yeah, and that's what I mean. When life slows down and life gets easy, that's when the demons catch up with you. So yeah, I still have to work on that work, getting that work-life balance sorted out, and not task saturating to the point where I'm burnt out and overwhelmed all the time. I definitely struggled with that this fall. Again, it's it's all one big learning journey, and really, I'm just inviting people to come along with me.
Someone's listening to this, they know they're battling their inner demons with PTSD and anxiety and depression and all those things. But they're suffering in silence, like we have been. What advice would you give them to make a change or break free from those feelings?
Every single time I've been, at my worst, and I thought I've hit rock bottom, it's always been talking about it that has saved me. Every single time without exception. It's going out and making connections with people. It's going out and, facing it, owning it, and the analogy I use is, PTSD, any mental health affliction is a bully. And what do bullies do? They isolate you, they alienate you, they tell you you don't have a voice, they tell you that nobody cares, and then they become the only voice in your ear. And what the voice was whispering to me was, you know what? You're broken, you're worthless, you're unlovable, you're undesirable, you don't deserve love, you don't deserve happiness. And that's the voice I was hearing in my head. When I went out and started reaching out to people and opening up, when I started connecting with people and realizing, you know what, I'm not alone in my struggles, and I could see them realizing they're not alone in theirs. When you basically take that voice away from the bully, when you take that power away from the bully by speaking up, the bully goes away. You're still affected by it, but you now have power to deal with it. But if that's the only voice you have, is that internal voice that's constantly beating you down, that's where we get pushed into the kill zone. Is really the way I describe it. That's you getting pushed out into the middle of no man's land, and eventually that's where you're going to die. So you got to keep those connections. You got to talk about it.
Got to punch the bully in the nose. I always told my kids.
Absolutely.
How you stop a bully? You punch them in the nose. They'll leave you alone. They're going to go to the next. They look for people that are going to give least resistance.
Yep. PTSD is a coward. It waits till you're alone. If you're not, and if you make sure that you don't dwell in that space alone, it's going to have limited. It's still going to impact you, but it's going to have, it's going to limit that impact a great deal.
PTSD is a coward. I love that. PTSD is a coward. Well, so what do you have working on? When's your next trip?
So my next trip is coming up at the end of May, beginning of June, and I'll be spending about 6 weeks on the road. I'm going to be doing Eastern Canada this year, 3.5 months. It was great post-COVID to get another, epic 33,000 kilometer journey all around Canada in. But I found by taking a smaller ride, I can focus my outreach more, hopefully reach more people in that shorter period of time. And, 3.5 months, when I first did it as a single guy, I was renting a place. So I basically, I packed up and left. I came home, nothing had been touched. Everything was right where I left it. I had no responsibilities. So it was easy to do. 3.5 months away from home, away from my wife, away from my dog, trying to reconnect with work afterwards was too long. So yeah, it'll be a bit more focused, East Coast, headed up to Labrador, Newfoundland. So I'll be getting out into the wilds and doing some outreach in places that don't typically see it, which is also kind of that underlying theme of being a dispatch rider. You carry that message everywhere, regardless of whether there's a road or not, or roads less traveled. So that's coming up next fall. I should be getting back to teaching with Fanshawe College. And honestly, I love teaching and being able to translate those leadership experiences to the civilian world. It's hugely rewarding. And I might be doing some motorcycle riding instructing. If you're not
Oh,
seeing a
sweet.
theme here, I love to teach.
Yeah, yeah. No, same here. Same here. That's awesome. Well, you're tying in what you love together. That's great.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
other
that's
than that,
fantastic.
trying to relax, trying to learn how to relax a little bit. Maybe spend a little time around the house this summer, just chilling out. We'll see.
Yeah, that's good stuff, man. I love it. I appreciate what you're doing. I appreciate that. And you're no bones about it. I'm out here for my own self-preservation, but I want to help as many people as I can. But in the meantime, it's therapy for myself. And there's no greater therapy than just being out in nature. And there's something about being on two wheels, whether it be a mountain bike, because I do bicycle and I ride motorcycles. I love camping. I love the outdoors. There's nothing more. I think it's just part of our biological nature is that we need as humans to be outdoors. There's a sense of peace that comes with that.
Absolutely. And especially I find hiking and canoeing, when you go out for, say, a week at a time and you're moving under your own power, and life comes down to move, eat, sleep, and that takes all your time and energy. That's where I found I can really find peace. When we take
Yeah.
away those modern conveniences and the ability to, cover great distance or communicate over great distance, when we take those things away, that instant gratification side of things, and you feel life slow down, it slows down in a really calm, really good,
Yeah.
peaceful way. And and being out, freezing my ass off on the bike, but waking up to, a sunrise in the mountains in British Columbia or on the East Coast, and waking up to, or, having snow flurries in August in the Northwest Territories and all those, it ties back to those hardships that we loved so much.
Mm-hmm.
They sucked when you did them, but you look back on them fondly. And I get to experience some of those things again too. And to be kind of just out on your own, under your own power. It's empowering, it's exciting, and it's rejuvenating.
No, I love it, and that's like you said. That's where I find myself, and I think that ties back to our inner human being. Like we're supposed to be there. That's how we're wired, and that's therapeutic in itself. So I encourage people all the time: find a way to get outside, get out there, have those adventures. All these creature comforts of our cell phones and Netflix and drive-throughs and all that stuff. You're not going to find true happiness there. It'll satiate you, especially if you've got depression, anxiety, and all that. Like it gives you just enough to kind of get through, but to really feel alive and to really heal, like get out there and be a part of nature.
Get out and find a little bit of discomfort.
Absolutely. Yeah. Go out there and do some hard things. And it doesn't have to be like physically hard, but like you said, camping and you get a little cold in the morning, right? You got to go fish and cook your own meal. It's all that stuff is good for you. It's good for
Absolutely.
the soul. Yeah. Well, how can people get in? Well, before we transition out the door, one more question. Two questions. What book or books have made the greatest impact on you, or one that you recommend the most for people to read?
Well, I definitely, I definitely, took aboard the dichotomy of leadership and extreme ownership from Jocko Willink, just because it was a great to kind of see that how to transition some of that experience to the civilian world and how to communicate it. I found that really helpful. But the one book that I have to recommend to people is called My Father's Son. It's by Farley Mowat. And Farley Mowat was he was a famous Canadian author, naturalist, but he's also a veteran of World War II, the Italy campaign. And his father was a veteran of World War I in the same regiment. And My Father's Son is all letters from Farley Mowat to his father and his mother and, back home. So some are written by his father, some by his mother, some by him. And what really struck me was between a World War I and II veteran, they're talking about transition and the challenges of coming home and connecting with people who didn't share those experiences. And it was the same in World War I. That the things that were written about World War I from his father would apply to World War II, Korea. They'd apply to Afghanistan. It was interesting to see how that struggle is timeless, as far as dating back, 100 years. So that was a real eye opener. It was a great book to read. It's broken into short segments. So yeah, My Father's Son. Couldn't recommend it enough.
I'm gonna put that on my bucket or my reading list, not my bucket list, my reading list, because I've heard of that book before. Someone else had mentioned it before. I'm gonna check that out. I think it's the topic of transition.
Yeah, and he was, he's a young lieutenant. He was always kind of an arsehole and a bit of a rebel rouser, so I identify with that as well.
Awesome. All right. So one final thing, I always like to hand my mic over to my guest. What question do you have of me?
Oh, wow, Jay, I was not prepared for that. I guess I would ask you, what is the thing about transit? Because your transition's coming up in about a month's time. What aspect of transition are you most apprehensive about? What's the thing you're most concerned about in terms of transitioning to civilian life?
I think for me, it's shedding that identity that the Army. For me, it was something that I pursued to close the door on just a really tough upbringing, and it was my safety, my handrail. No matter what's going to happen, the Army's going to be there. It's an abusive relationship, right? But yeah, the Army's going to take care of you. They smack you around a little bit, but they're going to make sure that you're filtered and shed. But you always have that handrail there, and you always have like the people around you in that community, and just letting go of that. Like we talked right before we hopped on. I've got to go turn in all of my gear, right? My helmet and my body armor and all of those things, right? And it's just when I walk the stage, it's the last time I'm probably going to wear my service uniform, and it just feels like I'm shedding my identity. I'm letting go. In one aspect, I'm excited, but then I'm also scared that, because once you're out of uniform, that's pretty much it. Unless World War III happens, that's probably going to be it. And so that's probably the community, the I guess the false sense of security, because that's security. Like I know I'm going to be okay.
Yeah.
But when I initially think about it, it's scary. But then I'm like, okay, I've got a great support network. I'm doing all the right things right now. I'm going to be okay. But it's still there. It's still there. And so that's probably my biggest fear.
Stepping into the unknown.
Stepping into the unknown. Yeah.
And it's funny. I was a keynote speaker at my graduation a month or two ago because our graduation was postponed. And that's what I talked about. I talked about stepping into the unknown. You guys are leaving school and, kind of going out into the world, and it's scary. And I related that to me. I said, 23 years in the forces and been to a lot of places and done a lot of things, but how scary it was to step into the unknown, but also that, a lot of times when you're afraid of something, that means it's the right thing to do. And that's where the growth is. So, and I know I don't need to tell you that, but yeah, that was that one thing. And again, with connecting with civilians, was sharing that fear, despite, I've experienced things they could never fathom. And they feel like, oh, I could never do that. I could never face that. But I said, leaving, just coming to school, something for them coming out of high school was maybe there's some fear, but it was probably an easier transition for them than it was for me. I was fearful. I was stepping into the unknown. I was apprehensive. But it's taken that step, despite that fear. And that's where all the growth happened for me. So,
I've stepped off on soil in Iraq. I've been in the unknown numerous times. The Army has done that for me numerous times. It's just a different operational environment. I'm going to take all the skills that I have and just double down on those. And that's what connected me with what my next purpose is, right? I can teach and coach and mentor and do all the things without wearing a uniform and still serve. And, knowing that is giving me comfort that despite the unknown, I'm going to be okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Finding that purpose for me too. How do I serve beyond the uniform? How can I still give back, but in a way that's meaningful to me? And I think, you hammered it, man. It's as cheesy as it sounds. Most of us, I didn't, I joined to serve my country. No, I joined because I wanted to blow shit up and like, let's be honest. But that part of the pride that comes with service and seeing the value in your service was something that, that grew over time. And I definitely, making sure that I'm doing something that's of worth and fulfilling. And that's maybe another thing, like with transition, find something that's personally fulfilling and you see the value in it. And, you obviously see the value in coaching and the podcast. I see the value in going out and encouraging others to just talk about mental health, so it's, rock on, brother. It's great to hear.
Well, I'm glad we're on the same mission and same journey together. And I look forward to catching up at some point, riding some motorcycles with you.
That would be awesome. You know what? I've got to plan a US tour. I'll have to get on that.
Well, definitely. Well, keep me in mind. And for those listening, so a lot of people know I have the other podcast, Budget Overland, where we just talk about vehicle dependent travel and camping. And we're going to have you on that podcast to talk. We talked a lot about PTSD and mental health and transition. That one's going to be more toward, we're going to talk about your adventures, your kit, your setup, and all that stuff. So if you liked our conversation today, you want to learn more about that. We haven't recorded it yet, but I'm sure by the time you listen to this, it'll be in the show notes. So you can connect there and listen to part 2, where we talk a little bit more about your travels. And I want to know more about your motorcycle and your kits and all that stuff. So
right on. Talk about the fun stuff.
Yeah. But thank you so much. How can people get in contact with you?
They can contact me through Facebook, Dispatches Adventure Ride, or www.dispatchesride.com if they want to go through the website. And all my contact info is there. So, anybody can reach out anytime. And if anybody wants to chat about anything or has any questions, I'm always there.
I love it. I love it. Your tagline, ending mental health stigma 1 kilometer at a time. I love it. All right. Well, thank you for being here. If you're listening to this, you want to contact myself or Mike, all the contact information is in the show notes. Just encourage you to do that. And just to truly appreciate you taking the time to listen. Once again, if you've gained any value, share this episode with someone that it may benefit. And I just appreciate the community for the continued support of the Do Hard Things Nation. And I just encourage you to just continue. Life is challenging. Just keep doing the hard things, keep getting after it day in, day out. And, we'll navigate this life together, and just keep doing the hard work so you can achieve your highest potential.